And I'm Ufuk, so from the Department of Architecture. I chair Jessica's dissertation committee, and Jessica's other committee members are Dr. Hankins from the Department of English, Dr. Haynes from the Department of English, and Dr. Mihalehe from the Department of Architecture. So a few technical details before we start. This meeting is being recorded, and we will follow the meeting routine. After Jessica's presentation, which we expect to last almost like 30 minutes, there will be a question and answer session. Jessica will respond to your questions and comments. And then the meeting will conclude with Jessica's private meeting with her committee members. So if there's not any question or anything else to add, then I will leave the floor to Jessica.
So thank you again, everyone, for coming. I am going to share my screen with you and get started. So is everybody in space with me? Okay, so special thank you to my committee for being here, my mentors who have shown up, my colleagues, and my husband for being here today. My name is Jessica Shad-Manuel, and I am working toward a poetic ecology of creative reading. This pursuit began many moons ago, but I got serious about it when I started teaching college-level reading, writing, and literature courses about 10 years ago. 4 years ago, I founded a global reading community. It's called Book Oblivion, and myself and several other instructors lead readers in conversations centered on literature and philosophy. In both the classroom and the online community, I've been silently observing the reading habits of my college students and these lifelong learners. Today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my journey and how it manifests in my research. So, at the beginning of every semester, I pose a question to my community college students to initiate their reflections on reading. In an informal discussion, I ask them to name their favorite book and to describe their relationship with reading and writing. Several of my students often boast about never having read a book. Others claim they hate reading. This used to be a rare occurrence, but it is becoming increasingly more common. We might call it laziness or apathy, but either way, the bigger question is why. There has to be a reason people work so hard to avoid reading. I'm going to share this video with you. What it does is contain some of my early findings and insights as to where I think the problem comes from, and it paints some vision for how I choose to approach it. How many stars are in the night sky? How many books are in circulation? How can we read in a meaningful way when the enormity of information available makes us feel a little like Atlas, cursed to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders? No wonder we try to control what we read. The science of reading is but one tiny star in the constellation we think of as wonder. Brain scientists still debate whether reading is best taught through phonemic awareness or the whole word method. But no one is talking about how vital it is to read with wonder. Why do you think that is? I suspect it is because reading is a skill that we most dominantly associate with the sense of sight. But what would happen if we embraced a multi-sensory approach to reading? Did you know that the word read used to connote the idea of balancing information and input through arrangement or order? To read was an act of creation, kind of like drawing a constellation to offer the chaos of the night sky some tender order. We relate to the stars, witness their descent, feel their energy rise inside of us. Like Virginia Woolf, we follow a star riding through the clouds one night and beg, "Consume me." Yet this is not how we read. We consume, we conceive, we congeal. When we conceive of reading as an act of decoding, whether we read whole words or sound out each letter, we inevitably end up criticizing what we read. Why? Associating what we read with sight is an exercise in control. We make every feeble human attempt to understand what we read by paralyzing it. But what if we release reading from the tyranny of sight to magnify the relationship of the book with our body? What if we read with love instead of suspicion? Before we do anything else, we must appreciate that the book has edges. It is a uniquely constituted entity, requiring a material, existential, and poetic ecology. To read for life means to read with love, to protect and care for the book and preserve our relationship to it. So this project started with a desire to develop a reading strategy that provided my students more inroads for understanding a text. I was thinking, how can I increase their capacity for understanding to help them walk away from their reading experience with more associations so that they might remember what they read? Is it possible to increase both their comprehension and their enjoyment this way? Probably yes, but that would be short-lived. One thing was certain, I needed to teach them how to read in a life-generating way. Otherwise, they will lose the love and excitement for reading as soon as they leave my classroom. Like most English professors, I started with expanding their linguistic perception. If I could demonstrate the way the etymology of this really common word has changed over time and how the utterance in the text offers the reader insight into several historic moments all at once, all of a sudden, the reader becomes a time traveler. If we could time travel, then what would it take to travel space? And how else could I layer the experience of reading for my students? My instincts told me movement was the answer, but I didn't yet know why. One of the greatest detriments to our relationship to reading is that we think that what we read is stable. I want to tell you a little bit about where this belief comes from. In one of Nietzsche's earliest essays on truth and lie in an ultramoral sense, he says truths are illusions about which we have forgotten that that is what they are. He is able to make such a bold claim in the latter half of the 1800s because of the way truth's very definition grew increasingly more static throughout history. Martin Heidegger traces the evolution of this word in a series of lectures he delivered in 1942 and 43, which is now part of the collection titled Parmenides. Early Greek thinkers used the word aletheia, which translates to unconcealedness or unhiddenness. Something that was visible could be known and consequently remembered. The idea here was that truth was that which is not forgotten. To know the truth, a person had to be with it instead of away from it. To be away from it meant they were likely to forget it. This withness was not necessarily for a single moment in time, but carried the notion of distance and time, so that a person was with the truth so long as they were on the right path. Not only was there a spatio-temporal dimension to knowledge, there was also a bodily dimension to knowledge. It was around the same time that what was known became synonymous with what was seen. Proximity to the truth was almost always visual, but eventually it became static as well. Bruno Snell points this out in his book, The Discovery of the Mind, when he emphasizes the word nous was a mental organ that was likened to the eye. This has important implications for the way the word truth evolved. The Latin word for truth is veritas, and ver communicates the idea of not falling. In other words, Orthodox Christians could stand firm for the truth. What Heidegger does next, though, is point out that ver is very close to veru, which translates to gate and communicates the idea of closure or certainty. It should come as no surprise, then, that truth soon transitions to certitudo, which communicates the idea of certainty or correctness. All of a sudden, the notion of truth is static and never moves. When Heidegger says that Nietzsche inherits his view of truth from the Romans, it is because Nietzsche is associating truth with the idea of certainty. These are the truths that Nietzsche is calling an illusion. Sadly, this is the cultural residue we have inherited. Not only do we associate what is true with what is seen, we think truth is constant and never moves. In a world that is steeped in false news and the weaponization of social media, it is crucial that we learn to attend to the textures and patterns of language in a way that is recognizable and repeatable, but this does not necessarily mean constant. This is why I see a need for creative reading, a reading practice that celebrates and returns to the notion of truth as aletheia and aims to build instead of destroy. You see, as much as I love to play with language and celebrate the literary theories that offer a variety of methods to do so, and I also believe it is crucial that we question the unfair power dynamics that are written into our culture. I think it is possible to orient ourselves to the world in a way that offers transformation, movement, and life. These are the layers of experience I want readers to discover. In Orality and Literacy, Walter Ong discusses our musical ties to oral culture. Rhapsody means to stitch songs together, and text comes from the root word that translates to weave. The conclusion Ong draws is that the word text has more in common with oral culture than literate culture because the etymology of the word literature refers to letters. Over time, these letters became increasingly distanced from what they symbolized, which was originally the animate world. In The Spell of the Sensuous, David Abram complicates this dichotomy between orality and literacy in a way I consider important for how we might read a text in our contemporary cultural moment. He comments on the way Aleph, which is the ancient Hebrew word for ox, was written to depict the appearance of the animal's head with horns. So it looked a little bit like this. When you flip it upside down, we have the first letter of our alphabet, but none of the rich history that this sign carries with it. Abram's concern, and one that I share, is that the distance between signifier and signified means natural phenomena begin to lose their own voices. The result is that the reader's relationship to any given text loses the very dynamism we might celebrate if we were reading for life instead of death, if we were reading for movement instead of stasis. So the move from orality to literacy solidified a material presence of the text, while the notion of truth evolved in a way that perverted the dynamism of this material. Plato warned us of this in the Phaedrus when he commented on the strange power of writing to suggest that what the written word represents is clear and fixed for all time. This is precisely what happened. Instead of appreciating the living, breathing, and moving elements of language in words and books, culture began to associate the letter of the law, or scripture, or science with the idea of truth as certainty. Early reader response theorists attempted to offer dynamism, but it was only ever on the part of the reader, never the text itself. The text was merely a representation of the author's consciousness and could only be activated by the reader. Wolfgang Iser is one of those theorists. He calls the reader's dynamic orientation to the text a wandering viewpoint. In his article titled The Reading Process, he makes a problematic claim that the stars in the literary text are fixed, while the lines drawn between them vary. His notion of determinacy falls apart if we regard language as vibrant matter. I borrow this term from Jane Bennett, and although she and I share a hope to be continually surprised by what we see, I remain interested in the relationship between the reader and the text, not just the text itself. My conjecture is that reading is an act of perception that includes both reception, the receiving of input, and creation, the making of meaning. The reader practices creative reading when she learns to attend to a text by enhancing her sensory reception and cultivating her capacity for creation. When I liken reading to an act of perception and call it a skill that we must develop, I am simultaneously differentiating my work from previous claims about the act of reading. I am not treating reading like an event. Instead, I consider reading an important part of our lived experience that is woven into the fabric of existence. I liken the reading experience to being on a path of observation. My question is this: is there a way to pursue a creative reading practice that celebrates the reader's ability to create while simultaneously fortifying the reader's experience of the text? To probe this question, I explored several different areas. I started with reading and camped out in literary theory for a while. While I was there, I explored everything from semiotics to psychoanalysis to deconstruction. Reader response theorists led me to phenomenologies of reading. As I mentioned, the dynamism was only ever on the part of the reader. This was most definitely dynamic though, and I spent some time exploring affect theory and the way we process what we read on an emotional level in and through the body. What hermeneutics offered me was a careful approach to interpretation and recognition that symbols and myths and stories change over time, requiring a constant need for interpretation. This led me to question how we read and process language, not just on an interpretive level, but how we respond to the words on the page. I found some answers in cognitive science, but what neuroscience taught me was that this response happens at a cellular level, and how we experience what we read is written on our bodies. This has everything to do with the stories we tell ourselves and how we come to interpret the world. So I started wondering how we might create narratives that offer healing from trauma, or might more meaningfully parallel the world we live in. This spurred me on to look for patterns in nature, which led me to question the way we create structures and build new worlds in response to texts. That is where architecture comes in. And to make sure there was no star left unmapped, I explored how this level of meaning making happens across cultures. Enter anthropology. In terms of where my scholarship belongs, my initial answer is among the stars. What remains consistent in my work is that I celebrate an ecological approach to language and the world and emphasize the relationship between the reader and living organisms or phenomena. I mention all of that to help you understand the diversity of research informing the three areas that make up my project. These are the phenomenologies of reading, carnal hermeneutics, and narrative architectures. So the phenomenologies of reading challenges what I referred to as epistemic paralysis, the idea that what we know is static, determined, or constant. To regard language as material is crucial to my articulation of reading as an act of perception. Michael Dufresne says to read is to perceive. In the context of this statement, he describes the unique weight, physicality, and gravity of words. I emphasize this to arrive at the phenomenological orientation that I highlight in my work. The phenomenology I'm interested in is expounding upon the act of reading that stems from Maurice Merleau-Ponty's phenomenology of perception. In this book, he implicates the body's role in the perceptive experience and recognizes the sensorial dimensions of language. Not only is there a physicality to language, but all perceivable phenomena share this quality. For Merleau-Ponty, perception is always participatory and rooted in our gestures. The body is constantly perceiving the multi-layered fabric of reality that creates the world. These layers include the environment as well as language and everything in between. Perception is a continual act of making and remaking as the perceiver interacts with phenomena in the world. His emphasis on the body in this early work is a point he elaborates in his later work, The Visible and the Invisible. This later work clarifies that the act of perception is always between two distinct but intertwining phenomena. Carnal hermeneutics challenges the sight-intellect equation, the idea that what we know is synonymous with what we see. What carnal hermeneutics provides the reader is language to describe the experience of reading with the body and between bodies. Carnal hermeneutics is uniquely positioned to read the body as text. Richard Kearney describes the way readers began to celebrate language with all of their emphasis on the book, reading, and writing as primary sites of meaning. This was at the expense of considering the body, feeling, and sensing as sites of meaning in themselves. In other words, the linguistic turn to the text was a turn from the flesh, and carnal hermeneutics aims to redescribe the way these sites of meaning are always implicated with one another. To achieve this, we need both sensation and interpretation. We need our carnal bodies and hermeneutics. Kearney elaborates on the triple nature of the word sense so that his reader might recognize how broad this task of interpreting senses really is. Sense is apprehended in terms of sensation, as in the five senses, meaning, as in interpretation, and orientation, as in sense of direction. To this end, he points out that we are constantly reading flesh, interpreting senses, and orienting bodies, all of which are tasks of carnal hermeneutics. Narrative architectures challenges the typical practices of deconstruction, the reading method that simultaneously breaks the shackles of our relationship with language while destroying our trust in it. Gail Weiss calls the body a narrative horizon.
She points to the chiastic relationship between bodies as texts and embodied texts, language being the common denominator for both meaning making and one that expands with the carnal dimension of human experience. To say that the body is a narrative horizon means acknowledging that our perceptual experiences have their own horizons. These horizons offer new dimensions of understanding because every new angle offers an opportunity to create meaning. This aligns with Paul Ricoeur's approach to architecture and narrativity. His notion of architectural space is lived and includes the mixed space surrounding the living body and geometric space that might be plotted on a grid. His notion of narrative time is the instant, which is also mixed and includes Augustine's ideas of memory, bound up in past, future, and present, or memory, expectation, and attention. The way Ricoeur moves through these registers of space and time offers a method of reading that I elaborate on in my project. His model consists of 3 key movements: prefiguration, where narrative is part of everyday life or the life experience or the lived experience; configuration, in which everyday life enters the realm of the literary and the beginnings of order; and refiguration, in which narrative is read and reread by the reader. With narrative architectures, I realized that the more metaphors a reader has to order her reading experience, especially beyond Aristotle's narrative arc, the more possibilities she has for inscribing an experience that resonates across time and space. With each of these research areas, my goal is to focus on the way readers expand their perception in order to attend to the text in energizing and dynamic ways. My research uses a critical phenomenological orientation toward reading to show how the text shapes consciousness without depriving consciousness of the agency to shape the world as well, a world that includes the reader herself. In my dissertation, I will emphasize 3 specific practices for creative readers to approach the text. These are touch, attention, and memory. To explore touch, I will focus on the reader's multisensory experience with textures and the practice of creating patterns. To explore attention, I will focus on the reader's attunement to details and the practice of arranging phenomena. To explore memory, I will focus on the reader's embodiment of narrative horizons and the practice of responding through creation. Reading is an act of perception, and movement is the essence of perception, requiring an ongoing relationship with language and the environment that we might liken to correspondence. Correspondence with the text celebrates bodies as narrative horizons that are woven together by a plurality of experiences. In the same way, the text embodies a plurality of voices. We need a reading practice that acknowledges that. Ultimately, I am after a kind of creative reading posture that celebrates movement. When the reader expands her perception and combines wisdom and creativity, my hope, and this project is built on hope, is that the result is transformative and enlivening. That is creative reading.
Thank you, Jessica. And now I think we are open to questions or comments.
Diane, welcome. Ryan's face is here.
Can I yield the floor to the man from California? Bruce, I'd like for you to ask the first question.
He's like, no.
Way to put me on the spot. So I'll say, if I guess am going to offer a question for someone who comes from a very technical background. In what ways could you offer to someone to read in this way that is not necessarily inclined to embody a full bodied approach to engaging with some very technical aspects of reading?
So assuming you're talking about yourself, I think it's all about layering experiences. So if there are people with, that don't have the literary or humanism background, I would say you layer the experiences with ideas they understand. So maybe it's hands-on inventing when you're learning about Leonardo da Vinci. You're recreating his projects. Everybody has the ability to go outside and observe nature. And I think a lot of this is rooted in nature study. So being able to enter into that realm is crucial. And I think no matter what background they have, the way math and science are languages that observe the natural world, I think it gives everybody a way in, if that makes sense. What else? Bring it on. What are your questions? I know it was pretty loaded there.
I'll take a shot if that's okay. Oh, sorry, Diane.
Who's talking?
It's Jason. It's Jason.
Hi, Jason. No, please, I defer to you, please.
Oh, okay. I was wondering, and this is maybe similar to Bruce's question, but I'm thinking about at the primary or secondary level. Imagine that you got to redesign kind of Common Core nationwide. Well, I can see this project as being so valuable at that level. Not that it wouldn't be valuable at other levels, but this is one of those like early intervention things. How could people change, without giving them like a literary background that matches what we might think of as one is now, but really just changing the approach? What are just some quick bullet points or some requirements that you might give if you were to try and give some kind of Common Core standard?
It's already happening, not at Common Core standards, but there's a whole group of people following the Charlotte Mason method of education. And basically what this does is she's all about the science of relations, which I don't know if I would necessarily use that same phrase, but that's the idea. So there are art studies and musical composers and Roman history. Basically everything is layered in really short lessons that keep the attention, and you layer them in ways that those children are making connections across different ideas and in different genres. And so all of it starts with nature study once again. So if you learn to attend to phenomena, what that does is offer you unique ways to enter into whatever you're observing and make connections in that way. So I agree with you. I think part of what is influencing my project at the collegiate and adult level is this idea of wonder that is sort of underlying this unique approach to educating younger minds.
Thank you.
Jess,
Mm-hmm.
thanks for representing the Record.
My pleasure.
You are on the other side of what I'm doing. You're literally on the other side of what I'm doing, but
What's happening
being
over
the
there?
Rhetorians, good stuff. But being the Rhetorians that we are, we don't see these as polar opposites or binaries. We see this as this existing tension. And I think what you bring to this is—
Wait, you just muted. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I didn't. You bring acknowledgement of that. Muted, can you hear me?
I can now, yeah. Oh, wait.
Crazy things are happening on my computer.
I'll just read your mind. Stay right there.
Does your computer respond to "Hey Recur" instead of "Hey Siri"? Is that the problem?
Pretty much, he's ringing us
Okay,
up from the
maybe that's
dead.
it.
But that
Okay,
productive
okay.
tension, right? But the tension isn't about the science, nature, and all.
How about perhaps to type, Diane?
I'll do what I can to respond as soon as you get it in there. If there's anyone in the meantime that has another question.
I do. I just don't want to derail Diane's questions, but I do. Do you want me to wait on her to get hers? Go ahead.
I'll make sure I address it, Kate Diane.
Diane, do you want me to hold off? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to ask a theoretical question with respect to certainty. Is there rectitude in the wave? That's the way I'm going to ask it.
What do you mean?
Well, you often talk about the, Virginia Woolf. You've talked about oceans, waves, those being important categories for the way you think about motion. That undulation, that kind of perpetual movement. And you're pretty critical of the term correct or certain. Well, I shouldn't say you're critical, you're suspicious of it. And I'm wondering if there's rectitude, there's verticality. Is there kind of a standing? Can you stand on the water, so to speak? Can you stand up in the water? And I'm asking that with respect, because I'm taking the word correct to quite literally mean to stand upright together. And if everything is in this sort of fluid motion, is there a possibility? Is there? And the reason I'm asking, I guess I'm wondering, where does the book's rigidity find itself in that kind of flux? Do you understand my question?
I think so. There's a couple
Okay.
questions in there, though.
Always.
Always.
That's what I call creative sensual reading.
So
I just did there.
I think the first thing I'll answer with the wave is not everything is a flow for me, which is why I camp out with narrative architecture. I like the idea of building and creating conventions and having something that lasts beyond the break of a wave. I think that that's really important, that we can create something that lasts. And whether that's art or a building or a photo or something else, that is a uniquely constituted creative expression. The pedagogical aspect of this is all emphasizing creative responses to the text in a way that they're creating something tangible. And that's an experience, it's art, it's a meal. So there's a lot of different ways I have this manifested in a curricula format. So I'll start with that because I think that answers your question in itself. What my hope is to offer basically this idea that the book is not as upright as you might have just described. And I think the dynamism that I'm trying to get at with even the way Aleph has those origins in the word ox, and that is where we get our first letter of the alphabet. The word M has its origins in the wave, and that is where we get that letter. And so I think the more we recognize these layers of meaning, the more potential we have to appreciate this movement, not in a way that is correct for all time, but that allows for the dynamism on both parts, both phenomena and the reader. And if that is possible, then we can continually be mutually transformed. And with that mutual transformation, there's life, there's touching. And that is where I think we make the money. I know you have follow-ups. Is there anything? Okay, so Diane, you said you were on the other side of what I'm doing, and that's not bad at all. I'm excited to finish my dissertation and spend more time talking with you. I love what you did with prefiguration, configuration, refiguration. Okay. One of the things with that too is I see that as if I start with touch, that's a kind of prefigurative, here's our lived experience movement. And then I go to attention, and that's configurative, where we can arrange details, and that's sort of the literary expression and contribution. And then refiguration is where creation happens with memory and narration. So transfiguration, I'm hoping, happens in that combination. And that's what creative reading is like all together. Okay. Anybody else?
I just want to say great job. And I love that you quoted Ong. We both love Ong. And
We do.
My question is regarding something along that lines. So Ong says, and I won't get the quote right, something along the lines of, it's the exact deadness of printed text that allows for it to have a potential infinite amount of capability to be resurrected. Would you view the work you're doing as a resurrecting work? Is that your goal?
I don't think it's dead in the first place.
Okay.
So that's, I think, where I would differ from Ong. But in his idea, like if I were thinking about this from his point of view, yes, probably. But I don't think it's dead in the first place. I just think we've been treating it that way. And that's what makes me sad. And I think that's why our our readers, our students. I don't think my experience is unique to myself in the classroom, as far as people really getting excited and jazzed up about reading in your classroom, but maybe not sustaining that kind of relationship to reading afterward. I don't think that's unique to myself. So that's what I'm hoping to reinvigorate, is that relationship to reading among people. And I think it requires us seeing the text as moving so that we can touch it.
Jessica, may I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
First of all, I continue to be amazed at how much you teach me in a short period of time. So thank you for inviting me today. Your focus seems to be on reading for students in a classroom, which in this setting is quite logical. But do you see ways that this way of reading could be expanded to a population at large, and especially to one that has endured previous education standards and methods and maybe accepted those as truth and the best that there is out there for them? How would you take this beyond the classroom, beyond the university, and into the world?
Well, Book Oblivion is actually my answer for that. I'm designing this course. There's a pedagogical component to RCID's program, and basically you design a course to be offered in the classroom. I'm designing mine for Book Oblivion 2022. And that creative reading class will basically layer the readings. I have a short essay, a short poem, and a short story layered with a video that they'll watch. And then basically I have a series of creative responses that they could use to develop their own creative reading practice. That's the goal, that eventually, so say your wife, Cynthia, is in that course and she wants to respond to each of those week's readings by creating a painting. That's what she'll do. And that painting will intersect the themes that she comes across in those readings. And then that is an expression of how she observes those readings and then can communicate things as they are. So that's the idea, is that each person would develop their own creative reading practice. And I've got lots of ways for people to get started. I have them arranged around the canons of rhetoric. And I think that those are good inroads, but ultimately the goal is to create something and to find something that you can do to create your own. I really like the creative compositions and what I'm doing with videos. Those are ways for me to fuse all of the things that I'm doing and to take risks and get them out there into the world and share that. So that's the one thing that I really respond with. But in the meantime, I'm making a lot of other connections and layering. Right now I'm studying patterns in nature, and I layer that with what I'm teaching my kids. So we'll go look for spirals, or we'll study the Milky Way galaxy or things like that. So I just layer that kind of same, I see it as perception. So my perception expands the more associations I can offer. And whether that happens in my college classroom, our Book Oblivion community, or my family's community, or a church setting, or anything else, I see that expansion as being really, really important for this contemporary cultural moment.
I got one more I thought of. Is it okay if I ask two?
Yeah.
Is it okay?
We have all the time in the world.
Yay! How does the format of the scholarly article need to change based upon your work?
You want
Right,
my honest answer?
Yeah. But I'll give you like the easy kind of dumb answer from me right now. Just very little awareness would be, I've seen people talk about what albums they were listening to and putting them in a works cited, right? And it feels like that's maybe an inch along the way towards what you're talking about. But what other things would you see?
That is not my audience. So I want to just be really honest right there I think that we've been doing it wrong for a really long time, and I don't anticipate changing the academic game. There are rules that you have to play by, and those are not my rules. So I don't think I am the best person to respond to that, because it's not where I see my work landing.
I disagree with you, because I think if the academic audience doesn't listen to you and we just listen to ourselves, I don't think that's a great solution. But that's selfish on my part. I think in terms of your side of the answer, it sounds like a totally healthy, good answer. But yeah, I'll speak for the entirety of academia and say, no, we need that. That would be good. But I totally get it.
I appreciate it. I just, yeah. And you do get it. You understand, and it's why you're asking the question. I think it's sad the question has to be asked, if that makes sense.
Hi.
Hi, Hannah.
This was so interesting, and I realized, like, as I was listening, it's nice to hear like all of these research ideas formalized in this way. It's really, really fun. I particularly appreciated the whole section where you talked a lot about embodiment and like bringing the body back into this sort of space, like through phenomenology. And I'm really fascinated and interested in like corporeality in writing practices, and hadn't considered it much in reading as well, but of course it's there as well. And I also enjoy how much there's direct application to your pedagogy. I think sometimes like this theory can feel very ethereal, and to like see it grounded and ethereal is nice, that it can function in both ways. And I was just wondering, have there been any like really successful things that have felt really successful in your own teaching practices that have like brought the body back into the space, or things that you could like pass along to other people who are looking to do that kind of work as well?
I think my number one goal when I am teaching in this way, and sort of what has influenced my even articulation of this, has come from that idea. So when I taught The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, my husband's military stash of MREs, which are meals ready to eat, they're basically like what Marines will eat in the field or while deployed. They're full of preservatives, and so they last forever. They're sealed in this plastic bag. Nicholas knows what I'm talking about. When I taught that book, I basically took a bunch of his meal ready to eats, his MREs, to the classroom, because in The Things They Carried, Tim O'Brien talks about that being one of the things that weighs heavily in that bag. And so my students open them up, and then all of a sudden they're experiencing a different kind of sensation as they are talking and discussing the text. And that will trigger memories in ways that will last them beyond the four walls of that classroom. When I taught Haruki Murakami's Norwegian Wood, that novel, I basically started every single class with listening to the Beatles song by that same name. And so if we're discussing that text for maybe 6 or 7 of our classroom sessions, they'll hear that 6 or 7 times. And so when they're walking through like an outdoor mall 5 years from now, they're going to hear Norwegian Wood come on the radio or the sound speakers, and it's going to take them back to our classroom. So that's the kind of layered experience I'm after. And I've been able to do that in certain ways, and I'm always looking for ways to do that with the texts that I'm offering. One of the unique things I'm doing now is sort of expanding their perceptual awareness by layering the readings, not just, I guess, the sensorial experience of the text itself. So I have different poets that I partner with the short story that we're reading and things like that. And I think that layering is helpful to show them how related these kinds of things are. And I see there being fruit there. So just the ability to create multiple associations on several different levels, I think, is the goal that I'm always trying to keep in mind. And you're right, it does completely relate to writing practices as well.
Great, thank you.
And I really appreciate, Jessica, because a big part of that is associating prefiguration with touch, which is profound, because I've always just read the last step of the hermeneutical circle is the actual like physical connection to reality, but bringing touching to the first stage before you get to reconfiguration, I think that changes the game. So you need to hurry and finish this so that I can quote you before I'm done. So
You got it. You got it. I'll get on it. And honestly, Record already has it there. So he says that prefiguration element is the lived experience. And so that includes touch. That includes our 5 senses. So really, it's already there. But I'll write that so you can quote me too. I'm just kidding. Anybody else? Does everybody want to go home and read right now? Or you probably are at home, huh?
Right. So if there is no more question, then should we invite the audience to leave, and we should start to discuss with Jessica her dissertation as committee members?
Thank you everyone so much for
Thank you very
coming.
much.